Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the LGS Pod, the Soccer Shorts companion podcast, where we try to shine a spotlight on stories about local grassroots soccer here in our hometown of San Diego, as well as across the U.S. and around the world. My name is John Cross. I'm the founder of Soccer Shorts, and with me tonight, as always, is our co-host Dylan Wilson. Dylan, how are you doing today?
Doing well. How about yourself?
Doing well. We have the Club World Cup has finally ended. All the post-mortems and all the usual things that happen at the end of a tournament are going on. What do you have? I know for the two of us, we were not huge fans. Neither of us watched too many games. Do you have any big thoughts, good or bad, about the Club World Cup now that it has finished?
I think it's a cool idea. But I found myself early on when a lot of the non-UEFA teams were involved, a little more interested, even if I wasn't watching games. But I think my final full takeaway is, and I actually was just thinking about this the other day, I don't think the every 4 years World Cup format really works for the club teams. And here's why. Because when Argentina, for example, is in a World Cup semifinal or a World Cup final, the entire nation, I don't even know, 100 million people, however many people live in Argentina, stops, for that day, right? Because it's about something bigger than any one part of the country, ideally, right? I understand, there's maybe some political nuance to that, but anyway, that is not also true for this club teams, right? I think it was Boca Juniors was in this. I doubt most of the country of Argentina gave a crap outside of River Plate, where they were probably pretty happy to see Boca not do well. So it just, and I understand that seems like kind of a weird distinction to draw, but it just will never fundamentally have the same global appeal or interest that the actual World Cup does, for the simple reason that only a select number of communities worldwide were really involved in it. And even though they were technically a global set of communities, they were kind of just dots around the globe rather than like these, whole cultures like getting behind this movement, right? Like think about the African teams, the way that like they bring their culture into the stands. I mean, yeah, that did happen for, I think, Mamelodi Sundowns were one of the African representatives. I know Al Alti were there and they had some good fans, but it's not quite the same because it's one community represented as opposed to the entire nation, culture, whatever you want to say. So it's kind of a neat concept, even if I was very critical of the execution. But I think ultimately it occurs to me that this idea of like global appeal doesn't really work on the club level the same way it does on the national level.
Yeah, that's I'm gonna push back on that just a little bit. I get what you're saying, because I'll have to say off the bat, and if anybody who's listened to any of our podcasts has not figured this out by now, I'm not a fan of this tournament at all. And now that it's done, I think I'm even less a fan of the tournament. Mm-hmm. I think if the true cynic in me speaks, it's a perfect example of sane washing, sports washing, all those things, because at the end you get a lot of people who have enjoyed this tournament or aspects of it and maybe are looking forward to it again. And this is exactly why sports washing works in the first place. I think there were tremendous problems with game time. Like it strikes back to, like, we didn't consider player safety very well or fan safety when you're talking about the times of day for kickoffs, but it was more about marketing and media. I totally agree with you, though. It's hard, I think, to do this kind of like a World Cup format for club teams, because when you get teams that qualify based on what they did years ago, you're not necessarily getting the top clubs in the world that are right now playing to determine who the top club is going to be. Who is the club world champion? You're the club World Cup champion. Chelsea is the club World Cup champion right now. And as well as, again, I can't say because I didn't watch, but hearing reports and watching other videos and news stories and highlights seemed like they did well. Seems like Chelsea might be a force in the Premier League this year coming up. But I think if you look at the last season, I don't think there's too many people that would argue, and this is supposed to be an extension of this last season, that too many people would argue that Chelsea was one of the best teams in the world. And of course, when you get a knockout tournament like this, I mean, that happens also. That happens at the World Cup. You don't necessarily get the best teams that will make it. But usually there's qualification to get there. And I think I really don't like this tournament in this format because it just, to me, well, you said there was something that struck me that I'm going to disagree with, that you said that, it only is for pockets of the world, are interested. And when I think of the Champions League, I think there is still worldwide interest all the way to the final of that. But the format of the tournament is very different. It goes all year long and it narrows down. It's not you throw a bunch of teams together for 4 weeks and do a World Cup style tournament. And I think it has a lot of flaws. And I know other people have put this out in other articles and social media, but just also as another reminder, the more traditional Club World Cup, like we've seen in previous iterations before this expanded version, is actually coming up this December with the winners of their different confederations that will be playing. Well, and again, it's kind of a screwy tournament the way that this reimagined Intercontinental Cup, which the old Intercontinental Cup never used to be all the winners of each confederation's tournaments, but it will be now moving forward. And it's, I looked at the tournament profile a little bit before we started the show, which I wasn't aware. Like, how are they going to do it? You're going to take the 6 confederation winners. Well, they basically taken PSG, the UEFA champions, and they've given them a bye all the way to the championship. So it's kind of like Oceania and CAF.
I mean, that's kind of how the Club World Cup used to be. The UEFA champion would get a bye right through to the semifinals, I think it was.
Yeah, and there were some like that, but you get a couple teams play, and there'll be a winner determined, and then a couple other groups, because I think Concacaf plays CONMEBOL champions, and whoever wins that then moves on, and then eventually, once everybody else is sorted out, then they're going to play PSG. But still, to me, I like that just a little bit better, and it's not going to be played in a direct tournament. That, because you have different confederations winners playing each other, they're going to figure that out. And it's like a super abbreviated Champions League in that it'll take place over a period of time, but you'll arrange these games and they'll play, and we'll get a Club World Cup, winner. I guess not Club World Cup because that's this new extended tournament, but the Intercontinental Cup at least.
I didn't realize they were going in the interim years. That
yes,
kind of changes my outlook on the Club World Cup tournament, to be honest with you. That's kind of lame.
Yeah, and I actually like the Intercontinental Cup.
Yeah. Right.
Because it takes,
do that every year.
It takes your confederation winners and have them play together, and you can crown a champion. But I think when they were doing this before, it never quite caught on. And well, I mean, sometimes teams refuse to participate, but it didn't catch on, I think, also in the sense from a marketing standpoint of, there wasn't a lot of money involved. There weren't reasons for people to commit resources to take it seriously and then claim we are champions of the world. So I'm sure that's one of the reasons that the Club World Cup came about in the first place in this expanded version. And of course, being in the US, and you have a place where you have generally good infrastructure, at least historically. We'll see what happens moving forward for us. But there's as we've talked about on the show before, the US is the world's ATM in terms of soccer. Everybody comes here, have a tournament here. We'll talk about this when we talk about the history of the Gold Cup. But come here, do your tournaments here, make your money, and then you can offer prize money and you get lots of people come in because, again, historically, we have a very diverse population compared to most places. We have expats from around the world that live in the US. So you have a built-in fan base that you may not get. You still will get a lot of people travel, but you'll get a lot of people from just the US who will show up to these games. So I get it from the business part of it, but I think it's that business side that makes me hate this Club World Cup more
Yeah,
and more.
100%.
It rubs me the wrong way. And of course, you know, I know it's my own personal bias. I don't like it, but the way the final ended, and I saw, the videos of the trophy lift and everything else, and it just like, to me, I'm glad I didn't watch it because I probably would have been more furious, with some of those things that happen with politicians inserting themselves in the middle of the sporting event. You want to talk
Yeah.
about taking politics out of sport.
The ironic thing is, I don't even think he was doing it for political reasons. I think he's just genuinely that much of a dickhead narcissist that he didn't realize it wasn't about him in the moment. I think it had nothing to do with politics. But anyway, that's a whole different conversation.
Yeah.
I did want to say, though, I thought it was interesting that your kind of the first comparison you made was to the Champions League, because I would argue, and I hate to sound like I'm agreeing with UEFA executives on this, but it seems very blatant to me from where I stand that kind of the whole point of this Club World Cup thing that they're doing is to try and wrestle away some of the global relevance that the UEFA Champions League has, as you kind of mentioned. And the format is part of that.
Absolutely think that is the case. Yeah.
But I also think it's just because that's historically where, you can throw a lot of money at something, but that doesn't give it the gravitas that you want it to have necessarily. And the Champions League, for all its faults, is still, in the literal sense, a meritorious competition. Right. Whereas the Club World Cup, as you kind of outlined, and for some other reasons we've talked about before, is not as blatantly that. So yeah, I don't know. It is kind of, it's hard to look past the business side of
it. I had to laugh in some of the post-mortems that were out. There was, I don't know if you saw it, Sepp Blatter had a lot of comments about selling out to Saudi Arabia and all these different things. And I found it incredibly rich and I agreed with a lot of things that Sepp Blatter was saying, but I find it incredibly rich that this is the guy who's complaining about it now, the one who disgraced former executive right before Gianni Infantino here and forced out. And
it's the same way that Republican Congress people suddenly find their conscience when they're no longer an elected representative. It's like when you're not on the hot seat, they can speak the truth finally.
Right. Yeah, well, it'll be interesting to see what happens in the next 4 years. Maybe I will change over time, but I actually think I am looking forward to the Intercontinental Cup coming up, and the final is going to be in December. I don't know when the earlier matches, and I know the CONMEBOL doesn't have their champion yet, so I don't think that happens till the end of November. So that needs to be sorted out as well and start getting some of the games. But to switch gears a little bit here for women's soccer, one of the things I saw in the news, because of course, we have transgender issues in terms of politics and people inserting themselves to change laws. And we've seen what's happened over in the UK. There was a story in The Guardian, I don't know if you saw it, of a conservative group that it's hard to tell from the article a little bit, but looks like they might be trying to insert themselves in NWSL and ensure that there either isn't a transgender policy, which the NWSL had one, But I learned from the article, which I didn't realize, it lapsed in 2022 and they've never done anything about it to reinstate. It just quietly went away. And, it's going to be interesting as we move forward in our country if we're going to get these conservative groups that are going to come in and try to force a league like the NWSL or US soccer to do things like the English FA have done. And I really hope we don't go down that route. I mean, a lot of people are going to have to speak up, but it's could be, I don't know, looking at the writing on the wall with things, could be inevitable that it is coming. What do you have any thoughts on that? I mean, it just, I feel like, I think there are some valid concerns in some very, very narrow things in a lot of this, but I think these conversations about transgender athletes, and I think they're all solvable, first of all, but I think people weaponize this to leverage their hate, leverage something else that they want out of it, but they found a way they can use this as a wedge issue to get something that they want. And it's you're affecting the lives of human beings, and it just seems people who are going so hard on some of these issues are just, they treat these people like they're not human. They're just a thing that's out there. And I think that's what disgusts me the most about these groups and these policies, and why we have to make it so difficult, in this fear that men are going to take over women's sports, when like it just, there's no data that shows that that is actually happening, that people are like in movies dressing up to be the opposite gender to go in and become a star athlete of a team. I mean, it's ridiculous.
I recall reading that in like the 70s or the 80s, the KGB was conducting mind control experiments, but not in the way that like MK Ultra did with like drugs and shit. And they found that all it took was 2 months of consistent hammering and berating of like a fear-based message, and somebody would take on that belief to a degree that they would never let go again in their lives. And obviously, like, people who watch Fox News and shit like that aren't tied to a chair and blasted with this shit for 2 months, but for the last 5-10 years, they've voluntarily been blasted with this shit for a few hours a day. And I do think that, you talk about there's no data. They don't care, because there's never gonna, you're not gonna be able to data them out of believing that men are ruining women's sports, right? And so I'm not. I mean, well, I guess I am saying people are brainwashed. Like, I don't know what the answer is, because society seems a little too willing to throw trans people under the bus, and I'm really, I'm fearful for the future, because I don't know what the answer is.
Yeah, I don't either. Let's well, I mean, we're going to talk about this. I know things are going to come up over time that we'll circle back and revisit this, but we'll end this section with staying in women's football, but with some good news, because I feel like every time we do this kind of opening news segment, there's a lot of negative conversations about things. So I always try to find something positive we can end on. I don't know if you saw this, but Swiss club Young Boys, been around for a long time, but like lots of clubs, they have, even though they're Young Boys is the name of the team, they do have a female team. And the Swiss club there, they decided just recently that they're going to grant a 1-year contract extension to any of their female players on the team who become pregnant in their final year of their contract, as part of a wider equality initiative promoting women's roles in football. So I thought that was fantastic. Like, just going above and beyond. And there's lots of stories out there like this. I know sometimes we and lots of people get caught up in some of these negative stories, but I do think some of these kinds of things are the stuff we really need to highlight. I think that's awesome that, you're in your final year of a contract and you find out you're pregnant, and they'll extend your contract by a year to make sure you're covered at least through it. So I think that's through the pregnancy. And I don't know how all the healthcare works throughout Europe, the different levels of universal healthcare and what people may or may not have to do or access to care. But on the surface, at least, that sounds outstanding. And I would hope NWSL teams and teams in this country would look at that as a potential model, to help people out, to treat humans like humans.
I hope I am wrong, and I hate to sound like a cynic, but I think there's no fucking way that happens in the NWSL anytime soon, because I just don't see American business owners going for it because they don't have to. And I think they'll view it as setting a horrible precedent, not only for sports, but for like wider business in the United States. I hate to sound cynical, but I just don't see that happening in the United States like anytime soon.
Well, my gut agrees with you, but I hope we're both wrong on that.
Same. Cheers to that.
All right, so let's move to our cup kind of conversations. Really, the only thing we had the U.S. Open Cup have some of their games last week. We had one match that got postponed from weather. That was the Philadelphia New York Red Bulls match. So they won't be playing till August. But any thoughts on those results or anything for the U.S. Open Cup?
I saw there was one big blowout. I don't remember who it was. Was it Chicago scored like 5 goals or something like that?
Well, Minnesota beat Chicago. Nashville beat DC United 5-2.
That's what I was thinking of. Yeah.
So Minnesota will be hosting Austin in one of the semifinals, and I believe, I don't remember exactly, but I believe based on the draw, even though Nashville beat DC United, I think they hold the lowest priority of hosting. So I think whoever wins between Philadelphia and New York Red Bulls will host Nashville.
Do you know why this last quarterfinal game is like over a month later than all the other ones?
Well, yeah, I mean, they had severe weather, and unlike in the Club World Cup where you have to play, and they had, some huge delays with times for the matches, because they could reschedule it, I think they just decided there's no reason to wait however many hours. Let's just go home, reschedule it, mid-August, and because the semifinals aren't until mid-September, so there's plenty of time to squeeze it in. I think it was just purely no reason to wait it out and make everybody else wait it out.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah. That's really the only, I mean, we're getting close to the US Open Cup. Next week, we'll probably talk about the USL Cup, because we'll be getting into the final round of that coming up soon. So I guess that takes us to our lower league news. And let me get a couple things queued up and ready here. So we've been talking about some of the playoffs. The USLW final is coming up this Saturday. It'll be 6 p.m. our time. It's the NC Courage under-23s against Utah United. And I forget where that's being played. And I don't know who is hosting, if it's hosting at a home field or if it's at a neutral field. But if you go to the USLW website, if you're interested in watching the final, they have online links to be able to watch a stream of the final. So 6 o'clock this Saturday, that's coming up. And then WPSL, I think I have this in slide deck here. So here's WPSL. And again, I still have not gotten to the bottom as how the San Diego Dons, who won the conference, did not make it into the playoffs. But they did not make it into the playoffs. But their WPSL is down to their final 4. So Friday they'll have the semifinals. Sunday they'll have the finals. I have to zoom in a little bit here. I can't really read my screen. I have it small here of who the final 4 are.
It's St. Croix, Legacy, Sporting Connecticut, I'm guessing, California Storm, and Chattanooga FC.
Yeah, and the California Storm is the one who came out of the West, and they've always been a strong team, and they might have won last year's WPSL, I think, but And the winner for the USLW and the winner for the WPSL should play in next year's Brandy Chastain Cup at a minimum. It depends if they expand that tournament out beyond the 4 teams. So they have something they are playing for to play again in a tournament later on. And again, we hope to see that Brandy Chastain Cup actually expand to what will eventually become the women's side of the U.S. Open Cup, because we really need that.
Fingers crossed. That would be good.
Yeah. And then in USL2, our local team, the City SC team, they actually finished 4th. They finished 2 points away from a playoff spot. I think they won their last couple of games, did not make the playoffs though. And I think we have it here for the playoff bracket, which is, I have it up on the screen for anybody who's watching the video side. So all the Western and Central positions are set. The Southern positions are set, but the Eastern side has quite a bit of teams that actually today, I didn't go and look at the scores. I think today is all the qualifications, final qualifications to see who get those last slots on the Eastern side. And then that will be the 32 teams that move forward starting this weekend. And I think they finish around August 2nd for USL2, but a lot of their stuff is online as well if you want to check out the USL2 playoffs. And along those lines, let's see if I have this queued up right. I know you and I are both familiar with Vermont Green. They were in the US Open Cup a couple years back. They are obviously from Vermont, a USL2 team, and they are hosting a couple rounds of the playoffs for this weekend that they sold out. And I don't know how big the stadium is. It's a few thousand. I want to say 4,000 to 5,000, somewhere around there. And they sold out the tickets for this weekend's playoffs. So several matches, for the round of 32 and round of 16 games. Sold it out in 4 minutes.
Wow. I knew it had sold out. I didn't realize it was that fast, though.
According to their post, sold out in 4 minutes. And they were like, please, give us some time to sort this out so we can, we'll contact people. But again, I think, well, I'm going to come back to this over and over again because I think it's the thing that the USL does better than any other league is they really make sure their ownership groups and really make it a focus that your team, wherever you go and you become a part of that area, you really connect with your community. And I think they do a lot of in-house stuff of helping each other out and building these great community success stories. Now, I have heard, I don't know if it's true, that Vermont Green really has no ambitions to go up any higher than where they are. Maybe that will change over time. But here's a League Two team, right? They just play basically a summer schedule, a late spring, early summer schedule, and they constantly sell out or have large crowds for their games. And, we get Annapolis that gets, 10,000 people at their game. I mean, it's amazing some of these pockets we have where these organizations have really connected strongly with their community. And I think that's really what separates the success of the USL structure compared to some of the other leagues. And, USL also has its problems, certainly territorial rights, other things, entrance fees, franchise fees, those things. I really hope we can move beyond that from a business standpoint for our leagues, but I'm really impressed with where this is headed. And just, every time I look forward in terms of promotion relegation starting on the men's side, how this potentially plays out. And you've got, these strong community teams that will probably do well moving up or moving down because of the way they've connected with their community. It's not about, well, we're going to be in the top league or nothing and we don't care. They've made those deep connections.
Yeah, I think you're right that the USL, that is kind of the thing they offer, and we said that even during the Loyal days, is that it's a very community focused club, and Vermont definitely does that, better than anybody. And to your point, they may not have ambitions to go up, but that's not that doesn't mean they don't deserve it. Like if the pyramid were such that they could go up even if it weren't their ambition, I bet you that they would, because they're a very well run club. And it, I agree, and I think you made a good point that clubs like these, it won't really matter if they get relegated or promoted vis-a-vis the fan base, because they're strongly connected. And that's kind of my response to all these people who will say, like, oh, well, the fan base will die, like, if they get relegated. So two things. First of all, if the club is well run, no, it won't.
Yeah.
Second of all, you're kind of telling on yourself there, aren't you? You're saying
Right.
if they got relegated, I wouldn't pay attention. Which, whatever, that's your prerogative, but don't make it sound like it's an everybody else problem. And third, I think this Vermont is a really good example of why the PLS is so outdated and so stifling, because they are nowhere near, Burlington, Vermont is nowhere near the metropolitan area population cutoff for, like, even probably League Two by the PLS standards. So, and granted, they're fourth division or whatever, so that doesn't matter. But why shouldn't a club like Vermont Green be able to be in the top flight just because it's in a smaller city? Like that is antithetical to what makes football great, I think.
Right. Yeah, I agree. And we know that the PLS standards were, I think, to give the benefit of the doubt to U.S. soccer and possibly even Major League Soccer, they were designed to protect Major League Soccer, but to make sure we didn't have another league that failed. But I think as time went on, and that was, I'm talking early on in getting this set up. But as time went on, then it was leveraged to prevent competition, and really try to stifle other leagues. And I think we're finally getting to the stage where, U.S. soccer is untangling itself from Major League Soccer. We have, the last I heard, at least, Rocco Knusa is still, appealing the decision from the NASL lawsuit that they had with U.S. soccer. Don't know where that's going to end up, but at least that first phase, we've had a decision, and I don't think it's any kind of coincidence that as soon as that decision was really announced, that initial court case, all of a sudden we started seeing USL start to move forward. In fact, and we'll talk about it in just a second here, but until we have the Cosmos back in with USL. So before we kind of get onto that, let's wrap up the lower league stuff with the UPSL. So UPSL is moving on the western side of the bracket, or at least as we're looking at the right-hand side of the bracket on the video here. We're down to the 4 teams that will make up the quarterfinals on that side. On the other side of the bracket, which is mostly the East Coast and the South, they're going to wrap those up this weekend to figure out what their 4 teams are for the quarterfinals. And then the following weekend they'll be playing, and I think their championship is around the 8th, 10th, somewhere around there, early-ish August.
Yeah, it says August 8th to 10th there. So
August 8th to 10th.
Semifinals on the 8th, finals on the 10th.
Got it. So again, lots of some of these teams, I know some people think, oh, UPSL, but some of these teams who make it here to the end, they will be in the Open Cup next year.
Well, I was going to say, I recognize Miami United from a previous iteration of the Open Cup. Correct me if I'm wrong. Oh, no, that's Dodge City Toros. I thought that was the Rio Grande Valley Toros logo I was looking at there.
Yeah, it almost threw me off on the bottom of the bracket. It's Balboa FC, I think. And we have a team locally in San Diego.
Balboa.
But it's FC Balboa. Yeah, so it's not, I was like, wait a minute, we had a San Diego team make it all the way through, but no, that one's from Texas. So
right, so the winner of this finals tournament gets an automatic bid to the opening round of the Open Cup, correct?
I believe so, yes. But I think it's more than just the final one. But it might be only the final. I don't remember. Well, of course, it changes from year to year. They're tweaking the Open Cup stuff, but we will see some of these teams that make it here towards the end in next year's in the early rounds of the Open Cup. And it might be for qualification things. You know, there might be some qualifying rounds that they'll take within some teams and have them play each other for qualification. But I don't know how many slots the UPSL gets. But again, there's some good soccer here, and you know, and we're only talking about these leagues because they have connections to San Diego, but you've got the League for Clubs and you've got the NPSL, and then you've got all the regional leagues like the Midwest Premier League and then the APSL and their structure over on the East Coast. But we have so many teams again. Like, God, we could just pull everybody together. Like and with the support that's out there and have a good structure, I think, and with the internet now and the ability to stream games and follow teams easily, I think there would be a lot more interest. If it was a little more coordinated.
That's a great point too you make there at the end with the internet. I hadn't even really considered this, which is crazy because I've watched real teams go from like a joke on YouTube to an actual team within the football pyramid in the FA, you know? And so like, or Dorking Wanderers, we've talked about many times on this show. And so it's kind of like, it's kind of weird to me. I hadn't really considered that, but you look at, they're back in La Liga this upcoming season for the first time in a generation. Real Oviedo they nearly went defunct 10, 15 years ago. They did an online fundraising campaign, and now they're back in the top flight. You've got the whole San Marino fan base that has developed worldwide through the Sweeper and other outlets. So, you know, the right person or club could really leverage that to make a space for themselves in the U.S. soccer space. That's a good point. I can't believe I hadn't thought of that before. But there's definitely like a niche there that hasn't really been filled.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things going back to the USL. So let's bring this up right now for USL League One, which is still playing like the championship. So we're not getting close to playoffs here. And let me, if I get the right thing pulled up. So right now, these are the 5 teams that will definitely be joining League One. And one of the things I think USL does an excellent job of is really, they've got a nice, clean website. So you have a central place where you can go get information, and they keep it updated, and they're constantly promoting themselves. So it's really not hard to find information about all the USL leagues and what they're doing. But I swear, sometimes trying to find information for some of these other leagues and what's going on is so difficult. And sometimes I have to reach out to personal contacts. It's like, hey, have you heard anything here about this? Because it's just not out there. And I think that's a shame, because as we were just talking about, leveraging the internet and finding all these niche fans. It's not even niche fans. I remember when I helped with the NC Battalion and I was doing the live stream broadcast, Nate Abarea was the play-by-play person. And I love Nate. I think he does a great job with play-by-play stuff. And it was in the NPSL, and we did these. Nate does a great call. I was editing some of the video packages and putting them up there, but also the live streams, so we had them. And we ended up getting people watching from around the world and it wasn't much. We weren't doing, fantastic. I mean, it wasn't high end. We didn't have a ton of money, I guess, but we made the most of what we had. And then, we had some decent graphics that were supplied by the league that we were able to mix in with the broadcasts. And I'm not trying to toot my own horn here too much, but like, it wasn't professional level because we're all kind of amateurs, but we were able to do a clean broadcast that was simple, one camera broadcast with an announcer who did a fantastic job and was well prepared to do the announcing. We had some clean graphics, and it's really all you need. And people they could follow their team, right? And I think nowadays that's what people want to do. You want to be able to follow your team. If I can't watch it on broadcast television, can I find it on a stream somewhere? I just want to stay connected. And if you can give them that ability to stay connected, you grow your fan base. and you increase the number of people who show up for games, and they feel a part of that movement that you're doing with the soccer team. And I really think that's, if more teams would do a little bit better job with that. But part of that also is the bigger ecosystem, and USL has built that, so they can get the pro rail thing working. I think that's another feather in their cap. Now we just got to make sure. I don't know that we'll ever have a truly open pyramid in the US with our antitrust laws and other things. I just, it's difficult. I'm not even sure US soccer could legally force it to happen, but they can allow it to happen.
Right. They don't have to force it, though. If they create the space for it, I do believe that people will choose that over
I agree.
the lack of it. I want to just point out, too, before we move on from this, these 5 club identities and badges and names, I would say 2 of them I'm not a huge fan of. 2 of them I have no strong opinions on, and 1 of them I like. But they're all better than anything the MLS has done in the last 10 years. And that's part of what the USL has set apart. Not just, the local focus clubs, but they allow them to have an identity. It's not just City Name FC or FC City Name, as Tom Penn so eloquently laid out for us last year.
Yes. Well, I'm hoping next week that we'll get another USL update, of an expansion update, basically. Alex Ashton usually puts out something, I would say, roughly quarterly. But I know the group from Eugene, Oregon is supposed to be having some kind of announcement this Wednesday. So I think that report's going to be bumped just a little bit to make sure that information's included.
Right?
What's that?
There'll be League One as well, right?
League One as well. And then the Cosmos, right? So those are 2 that aren't on here. Now, these are the only 5 that are official through USL 1. But that would, assuming there's no changes with the current teams that are in USL 1, that's going to bring it up to 19 teams. I still don't think that's nearly enough for Division 3. I really think it needs to expand hugely and regionalize, but that's a different conversation. But they're going to move up potentially to 21 teams, if they have 7 initially. But I do find it interesting that New Jersey group did brand as the Cosmos. They had a big thing last week. I think it was Thursday of last week. And still, and other people have commented on this too, but haven't seen anything on the USL site. There's no official word about that, even though they're saying we're coming in League One, we're using the Cosmos name. You would think USL would want to jump on that and leverage that a little bit as well. So I find that concerning, I guess. For USL is usually as well organized as they are. When a team announces, it's on the USL website. There's all these things that happen, and this concerns me slightly in USL League One. So I don't know if you saw any of that or have any thoughts.
I mean, I saw the announcement. I didn't realize there was drama, though.
But there's just nothing. I mean, so just kind of wondering, because USL usually really, it's lockstep. The team does something, USL does something. They might let the team do it first, but USL's then right on the back end of putting stuff up on their website, and there's nothing right now.
Interesting. Now, I hadn't realized.
This, I don't want to get deep into this because this is a whole other story. Maybe if we have a slow week, we'll talk about this. So maybe when our upcoming weeks where we're kind of between seasons and things. But there's a guy who has tried to trademark and copy and do things around the Cosmos name and logo. So I wonder if there's some potential trademark issues. I know there were a couple that lapsed, and maybe there's just a couple of legal things that they're tidying up to make sure that everything is fine before the USL actually, puts anything out on their end. I hope that's the reason. But that gives 7, and there could be more coming in. It would really be nice if they could get a few more and even just split a little bit. in the country into a couple of conferences or divisions.
Yeah, League One being a national league has absolutely not helped it grow. Um, it's because these clubs just don't fundamentally make enough money to be traveling across the country every other week. So having enough teams to regionalize League One, I actually think would open the door to more smaller communities thinking about joining, because it's just a fundamentally smaller investment at the outset of it.
Well, and I mean, if you look at the news and information that's out there, there's a lot more lined up. And off the top of my head, and I could be totally wrong about this, I feel like there's around a dozen more that are in some various stages of works to come on and be a part of getting into League One. So, maybe that happens next year, maybe it's in a couple of years, but it'll be interesting to see this change. And I've also heard rumors that there's some looking at teams jumping in on the championship level to be prepared to make the jump right away into whatever the first division is in a couple of years. So
it does seem like they're pushing clubs that direction. Like I noticed some of these clubs making the jump for next season are already League Two clubs. It seems like
yes.
the USL is kind of trying to funnel them towards establishing themselves in the lower leagues and then promoting, even if it's not through, sporting merit. Because like Sporting Lex is in the championship, even though having never had a winning season, I don't think so.
Yeah. So hopefully, if they can move to the merit side of it, I think that will help strengthen the league in the long run as well, completely.
Agreed.
And especially if you have to work your way up, because you have to successfully run your team and do well on the field. So I think that only helps it in the long run.
Agreed.
Okay, so one quick bit of San Diego news. I know we don't talk about SDFC too much, but we do have a local product who was on the team until I think officially today, maybe yesterday, but I think it was today. It was announced that Milan Olaski is heading back to Denmark. And I know there was a lot of buzz on social media about this since he's, went to San Pasqual High School, here my area of town in Escondido, and got to play then for the local team. We, of course, saw him play a lot when we were, supporting the Loyal, because he was playing up at Orange County. I think 2022, he was the league scoring champion. But seems to have been improving as a player and done well, and clearly had a great run of form while he was with SDFC. And saw all the social media comments. People are like, "Oh, I can't believe this! Like, such a bad move," and a bunch of different things. But then I saw a couple of comments that it seemed like they were just far apart on.
That's
money.
what I've heard. Yeah.
They both wanted to stay, but he wanted to stay, the club wanted him to stay, but they weren't just in the right frame, right numbers in terms of contract. And frankly, I want to say, as an individual player, as much as I love to see local products stay and play here, like, you need to look out for yourself and not sacrifice. And I have a lot of respect for, at least on the surface, for what I've seen, a player who's willing to say, no, I'm worth more, and I'll take my chances then in Europe. And I'm sure there must be some, maybe not hard offers, but at least with the agent, like, yeah, we don't have to take this. Like, yeah. Why go down? And I have no idea what the numbers were, but this is one of the things that also, again, I know it's my bias. I'm going to be out front, but I hear this stuff all the time with Major League Soccer and the way they do things. And it a closed system in a way, as much as I think athletes are way overpaid, first of all, I'll put that out there. But I also think the closed system of MLS severely underpays people. It suppresses wages. And yeah, I hope he goes, and whether it's at FC Northland or he gets an offer somewhere else or gets a loan somewhere else, I hope he's able to make the most of it. But a little disappointing that our local team couldn't. And again, MLS has crazy roster restrictions, rules, and maybe they just couldn't make it work within the crazy complex MLS fiscal system. I get that too, but that's another reason why I just hate the structure of MLS. Like we might have needed it back in '96 to get things started. It's not necessary anymore, except to protect owners.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah,
And I know,
I had. I'm sorry. I had
I was going
heard
to say,
that it was a
no, go
financial
ahead. You
issue.
go ahead.
I had heard it was a financial issue as well. And yeah, I agree. Good for him for backing himself. And I got to think too, having played like he did in San Diego thus far, even if Nordsjælland doesn't fancy him as a piece for the future, I'm sure they now view him as a saleable asset.
Yeah.
Because MLS is, as much as we like to shit on it, it's a pretty good level league. There will be people in leagues around Europe, in clubs in countries like Austria or the Czech Republic or like Slovenia, Croatia, some of those like B tier like country league kind of things. I don't see why they wouldn't have an interest in him if Nordsjælland aren't planning on using him, and he'd probably make more money that way anyway. So good for him.
All right, let's move over to our soccer history segment. I got a quick note about S.A.H, the Society for American Soccer History, because they're continuing to put out videos. Dylan, I don't know if you've had a chance to go look at their YouTube page and look at any of these, but one of the ones they put out between our last episode and this episode is some excerpts from the 1960 final of the International League. And we covered the International League about a month ago, right before the Club World Cup started, when we looked at the U.S. history and the evolution of these international club tournaments. So they have some clips there and several. They've been releasing stuff just like left and right. And it's been great for someone like me who loves this stuff going through and looking at some of the things we've talked about in the podcast, and then be able to go catch some glimpses of what was happening, what the soccer looked like. They have a US Open Cup final, I think the 23-24, something like that, US Open Cup final, which was the Challenge Cup at that time. But Fall River was one of the teams. So, again, for some of these things we've talked about a lot on the podcast, it was fun for me to go back and watch some of these. So again, go to the S.A.H website, go to the S.A.H YouTube page. There's all kinds of interesting information if you're interested in soccer history. And Dylan, have you had a chance to see any of those yet?
I watched one. I don't recall which it was. I did go peek after our episode last week. I don't remember. It would have been one of the more recent ones. So I don't remember exactly what video it was, though.
Yeah, I find it, they're not super fancy. Most of them don't have audio. They're just clips. You're not getting like highlights of the game or anything. But I always find it interesting to just get that snapshot of that moment in time, what it was like, again, what the crowd was like, what the play was like. And again, for some of the things we've talked about, that is part of our rich soccer history in the U.S.
Absolutely.
All right, we ready to talk some Gold Cup?
Sure.
Okay, so as we know, we just had the completion of the 2025 edition of the Concacaf Gold Cup, which is the men's competition for national teams. And Mexico, of course, won. It was their 10th title. And we'll talk about some of the things for the Gold Cup. But we didn't do this last week, which we had talked about, but we decided we'd do it this week, is dig a little deeper into the history of not just the Gold Cup, because the Gold Cup technically only goes back to 91 was the first iteration, but that's not the first time we've had these continental championships. So one of the things I talked about or alluded to last week is in trying to prep for this segment that we are going to do is how much stuff was out there. And rather than just looking back towards 1991 and moving forward, well, what were the precursor events before the Gold Cup and what happened? How did we handle international competitions even before there was a CONCACAF? So we're going to jump back in time a little bit, and Dylan, you can jump in whenever you want, or if you have something, or ask a question or commentary. But we're we're going to jump way back in time to the early part of the 20th century and just kind of build our way forward and look at how we got even to CONCACAF in the first place, and then how we got our continental championships or tournaments for the national teams on the men's side moving forward once CONCACAF was founded. Right. And before, and I know you've looked at a couple of things. Do you have anything to add before we get started?
No, I wouldn't say anything to add before you get into it, at least. No.
All right. So let's, just as a quick side note, because it's going to play into it, since we're focused on CONCACAF for our region, I do want to make a note that in 1916, CONMEBOL was founded, and I think it was I can't remember now, but I think it was the first full confederation of nations, kind of a continental confederation. I can't remember when UEFA started, but I don't think it was that early. And part of that founding that confederation was starting what we now call Copa America. So I just want that kind of in the back a little bit, because there are things within CONMEBOL that are going to affect the CONCACAF. So I'm going to skip ahead to 1938. And in 1938, we had the CCCF, which was the Central America and Caribbean Confederation of Football. And they started because they wanted to do a tournament as well. So they put a confederation together. They started a tournament of all those teams. But if you know your history, right, 1938, that's putting us right smack into World War II timeframe. So it was difficult for them to really kind of get a confederation going. But being in a very Latin, Spanish-speaking area for a lot of these places, or a lot of British and European influence through the Caribbean, there was a lot of interest in soccer. And with South America already having a confederation doing a tournament, there were people outside of that, but nearby, that said, we want to do the same thing. We want to start our own confederation. We want to start our own tournament. So the CCCF started theirs in 1938. And then in 1946, the NAFC, which is the North American Football Confederation, was formed. And that was Canada, the United States, Mexico, and Cuba. Cuba was part of the CCCF, but then moved to be part of the North American Football Confederation because of Cuba's strong ties to the U.S. Because remember, at this point, this is pre-Castro, so very strong connection between Cuba and the U.S. Before that. So Cuba switches over. They're part of the NAFC. And then the NAFC decided to do their own championship. But again, it's just 4 teams, right? 4 countries, Canada, the U.S., Mexico, and Cuba. So they did one in 47, and they did one in 49. But because there were only 4 teams, and because there was the Caribbean and Central America region, and because we already had a South American confederation, people got together and talked, and they created what I hear a lot of people say, like, why don't we do this now? Why don't we just have a confederation or do some kind of tournament of the whole Western Hemisphere? Because I think a concern we have in CONCACAF with some people would argue that the not a super strong level of competition, right? So it would be nice if we were constantly playing the Argentinas and the Brazils of the world in tournaments repeatedly. So in 1949, the Pan American Football Confederation was formed, or the PFC. And that was not an official, from my best understanding of this, and what I've seen, not an official FIFA-recognized confederation. It was more a loose confederation of the other confederations. But they called it the Pan American Football Confederation. It was made up of the NAFC, the CCCF, and CONMEBOL. And they decided to do a Pan American Championship. And they ended up doing 3 of these between 52 and 60. They did them every 4 years. And I don't believe it was every single country involved, kind of like we have now, because not every country had an organized team. Of course, it was the ones that had teams and wanted to participate. And I really think, just as a side note, between about 1950 on, to me, is the birth of modern football around the world, because we've finished World War II. And I think kind of with that 1950 World Cup, especially with the British teams, all they were not part of FIFA between 1920 and 1946, somewhere around there. So once they were back in FIFA, and you had Wales and Scotland and England and Northern Ireland along with the other team, I think once the world wars had resolved, World War II especially, then we start seeing really the birth of modern, not just football, but sports, the Olympics, everything else, kind of this goodwill through sports. So in this Pan American Championship that we have in 52, 56, and 60, we had those as this loose collection, but then as things change, if you go back and listen to our other podcasts that we did prior to the Club World Cup, the same one where we talked about the International Football League, we talked about a lot of these international competitions. And I know we're talking about national teams, but there was a lot of people and groups trying to organize different tournaments at different times. So eventually this Pan American Championship dissolves. CONMEBOL wants to stay and strengthen doing their own thing. And then the other two regions, the North American Football Confederation and the Confederation for Central America and the Caribbean, they decided to merge. And in 1961, that's when CONCACAF was founded. And it's technically, when you look at the structure of CONCACAF, it's made up of three different unions. The North American Football Union, which is just Canada, the US, and Mexico. The Central American Football Union, which is the 7 countries. I have to test my memory here. So we got Guatemala, Belize, let's see, Panama at the bottom, Nicaragua, Honduras, El Salvador. Am I missing someone?
Costa Rica.
Costa Rica, thank you. All right. Trying to
now
go
put
through
them
the
in
map
order. Now
there.
put them in order, north to south.
Yeah.
No, I'm joking. I can never get that.
I get El Salvador, Honduras mixed up all the time. So you got Belize and Guatemala at the top. You got Panama and Costa Rica at the bottom. And then I think Nicaragua. And then I always get El Salvador and Honduras mixed up. Now I lost my train of thought. So CONCACAF was formed. So you have those unions for the Central American region and then the Caribbean Federation, which is 25 different nations. Right now, it's 25, I'll say, nations recognized by FIFA, and then 6 other ones that aren't recognized by FIFA, but they still play as a national team, they still play within CONCACAF. So CONCACAF, we have weird situations like French Guiana. That is technically a French territory. Club-wise, they're part of the French league structure, but nationally they play within CONCACAF. So it's kind of like Guam. For us, U.S. territory is Guam, but internationally, Guam plays in the Oceania Conference, not in CONCACAF, even though they are recognized by FIFA. So we have some weird little things within some of the Caribbean nations there. But that makes up at least the current nations in CONCACAF, which not all of them were part of it when it was founded. But they decided, since South America was doing their own tournament, their Copa America, that they would start their own CONCACAF championship, which was going to be played basically every 2 years. And they called that the CONCACAF Championship. And that was the immediate precursor to the Gold Cup. And I have some interesting things I want to talk about that. But Dylan, did you have anything? I know I've been talking a lot. Do you have anything you wanted to add here before I...
Yeah, it's not strictly speaking relevant to the time era that you're speaking about, but I actually was just listening to a podcast, I don't know, maybe last week, that was talking about potential expansion in CONCACAF, which was that Greenland had applied to join CONCACAF. And I thought that was super interesting. I was strongly pro that, having known very little about it, just because I thought the idea of an away day to Nuke sounded pretty cool. But I was surprised to learn it was a unanimous no from all 40-something CONCACAF members, which,
Yeah.
I didn't
And that was just last June, I think.
Yeah, it was. I
Yeah,
didn't expect
very recent.
I didn't expect them to get in necessarily, but the unanimous no surprised me. So, CONCACAF is an ever-changing body, I guess, is the point I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, and I think depending who you ask, and especially in terms of Greenland, I mean, because Greenland did apply to UEFA, but UEFA does not allow members who are not their own nation states. Now, again, you may ask about the
Except for
Faroe
the
Islands.
grandfathered-in ones, right? Exactly.
Right, yeah. So there are some that have been grandfathered in, but that was a recent-ish, I want to say like 2011. I don't know when that was, but a recent-ish decision to not allow these territories in. But CONCACAF still does that. So then they decided to apply to CONCACAF, and I haven't seen too many details. I have read some articles. I know there are some thoughts out there that it was, with all Trump's rhetoric, nobody wanted to get into that mess.
Yeah,
doing that. And I hope that's not the case, but frankly, the flip side of this, that's the case, then maybe we might see Greenland in eventually as part of CONCACAF. And as you said, I think there could be some fun, cool away days. The argument I saw was they just didn't have the infrastructure, but it didn't say what they were missing or what they might need to do to be admitted.
And that's the thing, is there's no actual set like guidelines or criteria for what it takes to be admitted to CONCACAF. And I don't think the infrastructure argument really holds up, because I'm fairly confident there are Caribbean nations that are part of CONCACAF that don't really have the infrastructure either. So I don't know. It's it's arbitrary is kind of what makes it interesting. There's no real rhyme or reason to it necessarily.
Yeah. All right, so let's move forward with the CONCACAF Championship, which again played roughly every 2 years. And between 63 and 73, it was its own tournament. Whichever teams would be a part of it, and it varied a little bit over those 10 years as to which teams either qualified or could send teams. So again, it's not like it is now, where it's a lot more formal and there's a pathway pretty much for every country who wants to take and be a part of it. But they did their CONCACAF championships. And again, for those first 10 years, it was just championship and you got a trophy. Well, starting in 1973, to get ready for the 74 World Cup in West Germany, they decided to convert the tournament and have it double as the Men's World Cup qualifying. So there was a tournament, but really it was World Cup qualifying, and whoever got the highest points. So if we think back to our days of having the hex for the US qualifications, it was whoever won that and had the most points in their final round robin tournament that they did for qualifying, they just were awarded the trophy. But it wasn't like the hex in the sense that it was dragged out over many months. It was still a tournament format. Like you went someplace hosted it, and you had a tournament to figure out who was going to win and be your representatives at the Men's World Cup. So that was a shift that they did, kind of make it be World Cup qualifying, and that existed all the way until 1991, and they reinstituted a Gold Cup tournament, right, is what we think of as our continental tournament. But a couple of things to highlight when it was qualifying. And I didn't realize this directly till I started doing some more research on it. I really thought we had a gap and that the Gold Cup was reintroducing the tournament. And I guess it was in a way, but at the time, especially 85 and 89, I just thought in those years, like, it was just part of World Cup qualifying. That's just that's what you did, and someone got a trophy for it. But I really thought we didn't have a continental tournament. And I guess we didn't, but I didn't realize they doubled up as the same thing. But in 85, that was the 1 year that Canada won the tournament, that they qualified for the World Cup. because Mexico is the host in '86, so we only had one berth to fight for. So Mexico wasn't part of that tournament, and they, Canada got in. So this is, I think, this time in the '80s, and a couple of the things that happened to Mexico are really advantageous, where other countries like Canada and the US took advantage of these to help strengthen their standing in the world's games. So Mexico was hosting, so they weren't part of the qualification process, and Canada wins. They make it to their only World Cup on the men's side in '86. And then in '89, like, this is Paul Caligiuri's shot heard round the world that qualified us for the 1990 World Cup, that victory over Trinidad and Tobago. But that was part of this tournament, and this was part of, technically, the Concacaf Championship. And we sneaked in there as the second place team to qualify to the 1990 World Cup, along with, I want to say Costa Rica, but I can't remember now. But yeah, Costa Rica. And this was only because Mexico was banned for 2 years from international soccer for fielding overage players at the Seoul Olympics in '88. So on their team. So they were banned for 2 years, which opened up the spot for the US, which the US took advantage of, qualified, made it to the 1990 World Cup. And again, except for, we know, in 2018, made it to all the World Cups since then, except for that one. But that really kind of, I think, changed the US's destiny, that bit. And part of that was Mexico not being part of that tournament. That allowed the US to sneak in as that second place team. And then, of course, then we get to the 1991 and the Gold Cup begins. And then we have a couple trivia things that we'll talk about here. But I think a lot of people may know this, probably do. But Dylan, do you know who the winner of the very first Gold Cup was?
Well, it was the host nation. And
It was the host nation.
The good old Stars and Stripes.
It was the U.S. And I know Cesar Hernandez, I think last week, teased this article again. A few years back, he wrote an article about that 1991 World Cup. We'll put a link to it in the show notes. But that's a good kind of trip down memory lane. Crazy. Like, you think about what even national teams had to go through, even in the early 90s, compared to the organization and structure that we have today. Just crazy. But as you said, the host nation, the U.S. has hosted or co-hosted every edition of the Gold Cup. It has not been held outside of the United States. I mean, other than some matches here or there, but the U.S. has hosted outright or co-hosted the Gold Cup since its inception in 1991. And I think this gets back to CONCACAF realizing, one, it costs a lot of money to put on these tournaments, and you want to offer prize monies and things. And if you're going to do it in the country, at least at the time, that had the best infrastructure and had the most diverse population that was going to get fans to show up to games. Even if they didn't travel, you were going to get fans from within the region to show up for the matches. I think most of that first 91 Gold Cup, I know a lot of the matches were played at the Coliseum. I don't know how many were played outside of that. I don't know if you have that information at all.
I don't know. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, the U.S. won the first one. Mexico ends up winning the next three. In fact, the U.S. and Mexico have won every edition of the Gold Cup except one. Do you know who that other?
Yes, Canada in what, 2000? 2000? I want to say.
I don't remember. It was later than that, I think.
Let's see.
Not
Canada,
much later.
Nope, 2000. They beat Colombia 2-0 in the final. Yes.
Yeah, but Canada is the only other team. They've won it once. Otherwise, everything else has been shared between the U.S. and Mexico for the Gold Cup.
Well, and before we move on, just real quick, I'm just looking through the list of finals and semifinals. Guadeloupe made the 2007 semifinals. That is a French overseas territory recognized by Concacaf. I had no idea that they had ever even qualified for one, let alone made a semifinals. That's pretty neat. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, and I think this is, I mean, we'll take just a slight bird walk because the Nations League was created in 2018, and while I'm not sure the Nations League really helps Canada, the US, Mexico, maybe Costa Rica, some of the current stronger teams, it does allow you to keep playing some of these strong teams, especially when we get to World Cup qualifying. You get to know some of them well. But I really think it helps with our other teams, helps strengthen the rest of the teams within CONCACAF. And I think ultimately that's what you want. You want your region to have strong teams as much as, if you look at UEFA, it's tough to qualify for the World Cup. Well, maybe not the next World Cup, but it's generally tough to qualify for the World Cup. And you have strong countries that have been successful historically, like in Italy, that don't qualify. England has had times that they didn't qualify. Like you have teams that don't qualify because it's tough, but those teams are constantly playing against each other, and I think it just makes everybody stronger. And I think ultimately that's kind of the idea behind a Nations League, is to get your other teams to be strong, because I think for years and years there were a lot of what we might have considered more minnows, like a Denmark, that we don't anymore. We wouldn't say they're as strong as the other teams, but they could certainly upset any of the other teams. Like even your strong teams have to look out for a team like Denmark, but that wasn't always the case.
Yeah, I have to say, I know I feel like CONCACAF made their Nations League kind of because they saw UEFA do it and thought we could do that too. And I know UEFA made it as a cash grab to turn meaningless friendlies into potentially meaningful games. But I think despite the potentially misplaced motivations there, the kind of unexpected ancillary downstream side effect is that it has helped these smaller nations. And just as an example, I always try and pay attention to Belize just because I went there when I was in college for a month. I had a really lovely time, and I just like to keep up with places I've been. They have played more competitive fixtures per year since the advent of the Nations League than ever before in their history as Belize. And that's only a good thing for a country like Belize, which is very small, doesn't have a lot of infrastructure for football. So just even if you're just looking at the number of games being played, it's a good thing. And then you take into account everything else. Yeah, I was skeptical about the Nations League, but I am a fan now.
Yeah, and there's, as another side note, just in terms of CONCACAF, I don't think everybody's aware. I mean, we think of Central America and we think of the Caribbean, but there's actually 3 South American countries that are part of CONCACAF. That's Guyana, Suriname, and French Guiana. So those 3, and they're together up there in the northern part of South America because of politics generally. You got a British territory, a Dutch territory, and a French territory. And because of their connections to other islands within the Caribbean, and part of that
It's kind of interesting because it
colonialism, I guess.
Yeah, well, it is colonialism, but also geography, because the Guyana Shield is a big Amazon rainforest plateau that kind of separates the coastal population centers of Suriname, Guyana, and French Guyana from everything else in South America. So, in addition to colonialism, it's geography too. They're culturally and geographically, there it is, almost more Caribbean than they are South American. And I think that people who live there would probably tell you the same thing.
Yeah. And, is it Suriname? I think English is the language,
That's correct. Yeah, the former Dutch colony. Yeah.
Or Dutch over there. And then Guyana, I think, is English, and then French over in French Guiana. Yeah, so I agree. I think there's a lot of reasons they affiliate and associate more with a lot of what happens in the Caribbean. But I think unless a match comes up against one of those teams and you see it on a map, I don't think people always think about that there are actually three South American countries that are not part of CONMEBOL and they are part of CONCACAF. Right. I just wanted a couple things like for me when I think back about my time viewing the U.S. One of my favorite moments was in '98 when Brazil was a guest, and Brazil. God, this would have been. I don't know if this was before or after the World Cup. Anyway, in '98, I can't remember, but the U.S. beat Brazil in that semifinal match 1-0, and Preki scores this decent goal. I think we all thought it was great at the time because she scored against Brazil. But it was, bad weather, and Romario was one of the forwards, and Casey Keller just stood on his head. He had like 10 or 11 saves in that match. We'll put a link to that in the show notes, of the highlights. But that was one of those comes back where that was a crazy time with U.S. soccer where like we had the 94 World Cup, the national team did well. You had some great results through some other tournaments in 95 and 96. And, we stunk it up at the 98 World Cup. But then we have interspersed in this win over Brazil, this 1-0 victory. And then because of that, well, actually, we ended up qualifying for the Confederation Cup. The U.S. did because of that tournament, because Mexico, now I'm trying to remember why. Oh, Mexico is the host. Mexico is the host of the 99 Confederations Cup. So because they were hosts, they automatically qualified. We lost to Mexico in the final that year. So we got it as the CONCACAF representative. And Mexico ends up winning the Confederations Cup, which is the first time, I think, and now probably only time since we don't have a Confederations Cup. And the reason we don't have a Confederations Cup is because Infantino decided we should have a Club World Cup instead of a Confederations Cup. So Mexico won it. I think the only time a CONCACAF team has won, and the U.S. came in third in that tournament. So this was a time where the U.S. just up and down, could beat teams and then just could stink it up as well. Very frustrating. And then we had the 2002 World Cup, where the U.S. made it to the quarterfinals. But the U.S. did represent in the Confederations Cup. Probably its best showing was in 2009 after winning the Gold Cup. That was when South Africa
Spain,
before
right?
Yeah, upset Spain. Lost to Brazil, I think, in the final, but in the semifinals beat Spain and broke their unbeaten streak. And Spain was on this amazing unbeaten streak. The U.S. broke their unbeaten streak, but they got there because of their victory in the previous Gold Cup. So that's kind of the history of the Gold Cup. And again, the Gold Cup used to mean something because it got you to the Confederations Cup, but now there's no more Confederations Cup. And I've noticed, you'll have to tell me if you know, I feel like even though the Nations League technically is the secondary continental tournament, the Gold Cup is considered the premier tournament. I feel like more teams send their top players, whether it's Mexico or the US or Canada, in the Nations League and battle for the Nations League title. And we kind of send more of a B team to the Gold Cup because it doesn't really get you anything anymore. It doesn't qualify you for the World Cup. You don't go to the Confederations Cup. You get a trophy and you say that you're the region champions. But I think with all the other tournaments and things going on, I don't know if it has the same cachet that it did before.
Yeah, I agree. And I think one of the big reasons for this is that it's every 2 years. I've always kind of thought that was an issue because it just kind of by that very thing just doesn't carry the same weight as something that's only every 4 years. Like if the Euros are every 2 years, I think it might be a little more of a question whether it was the Nations League or the Euros that people valued more, which I know seems counterintuitive, but I think it's in addition to the fact there's no real reward for winning it. The fact that it's every 2 years lends itself to being a B team tournament.
Yeah. And it does give you a chance, I guess, as a coach and stuff to try other players. But I agree. I think if we did it on the off years, which then, the problem which UEFA has a little bit of the problem as well, but it's why part of the reason why we have an under 23 competition at the Olympics, because the Olympics, Summer Olympics, were the same year as the European Cup, the European Championships. So when you have, those competing again, like which team do you send? And that was part of the argument of UEFA promoting their own tournament, really, and pushing FIFA to say, hey, and other confederations did this as well, but pushing the Olympics, say, let's make this an under 23 tournament. So we're not, running players ragged, but also trying to figure out which players are going to play in which tournament. But it'll be interesting to see what the future of the Gold Cup is. But again, it'll be the cynic in me coming out. As long as the U.S. is still an attractive money-making machine for the tournaments, I think the tournament will still happen. It gives some people a chance to see, some expats a chance to see a team play in person that they don't normally get to see. But who knows in our political structure how much that changes moving forward. So it'll be interesting to see how the Gold Cup plays out. But I agree. I would prefer to see it as a quadrennial tournament as opposed to a biannual tournament.
Just want to commend you for the correct usage of quadrennial there. People always get caught up arguing whether it's biannual or semi-annual, not realizing those mean the same thing, and it's actually biennial is what they're thinking of. So yeah. I know you're a former teacher, so that's probably part and parcel of the work, but well done.
All right. Well, that's all I have for the kind of history of our region's continental championships. You got anything to add?
No, I didn't know a lot of that before coming into this, so it was interesting to learn about it. And I like I'm a fan of the more regionalized championship tournaments. Like I love reading about the old days of like the Caribbean Championship and stuff like that. So yeah, it's fun to kind of learn about how it all came to be.
And we have CONCACAF World Cup qualifying going on right now between the rest of the countries, right? Canada, Mexico, and the US get a berth. I think there's 3 other berths that are automatic for CONCACAF, and then 2 additional ones that are going to be
like at large or whatever.
Interregional competitions, like maybe one against Oceania and one against CONMEBOL. I don't know. I mean, CONMEBOL only has 10, right?
13,
10 countries?
11?
Is it 11? But still, I don't know with this expanded World Cup, like, does almost everybody make it in now? Like, if we're getting 6, maybe 8, like, I don't know how many they're going to have. I mean, that's a conversation for another time, but I really hate this idea of 48. And even talk of expanding it to 64, I've heard recently, but
I mean, at that point, what is even the point,
Yeah, unless you're going to do it throughout, like you're not making it a at a nation tournament kind of thing. You're going to string it out like we do the Champions League, where you're playing across a season and you're just doing matchups at different times. I know that's club teams and we're talking international teams, but unless you're going to do that kind of idea where you just kind of spread it out, like, okay, here's first round matchups. They got to play during this international window. And maybe you do it, but how is that really different than World Cup qualifying? And you know,
Well, yeah,
while
exactly.
I dislike the Club World Cup and I don't like the format for clubs, that I really thought I would like it when it was first announced,
Hmm.
but I ended up not liking it and really don't like it at all. I do love it for the World Cup for the national teams. I think it's a great thing to do and have and bring people from all different nations together. I think it's a wonderful idea. And as you said early on in the podcast about, you know, people representing their nation, not just one small little piece from a club.
Yeah,
Um,
I didn't care that LAFC or whoever else was in the Club World Cup, but even just regardless of how I feel about the United States at the given moment, I am always going to tune in to root for the U.S. in a big tournament, and it's just fundamentally those are two very different propositions.
yeah, I agree with you there. So we'll see how those things play out, and you know, with the cash grabs, who knows how things are going to play out with all these tournaments moving forward. All right, before we wrap things up completely, just in our constant teasing of a book club, we we had talked about a book called States of Play. I want to say way back, almost in the winter, one of our first podcasts, by Miguel Delaney, and I thought it was something that we might be able to read, or if we ever kind of get this book club going. I know we keep cataloging these books, but I just saw the author put something out that the book is getting ready to come out on paperback. And I think it's going to be out on August 7th. And he said there's a new chapter that is centered all around Infantino's relationship with Trump. I don't know if that's a selling point or not a selling point for the book, but this whole idea of States of Play is about, I don't necessarily want to say corporate corruption, but the corporatization of the sport. Um, so anyway, putting that out there, we'll put a link in the show notes as well as something if we ever get around to doing something where we read that particular book.
Sounds good.
All right, Dylan, any plans for the week in terms of soccer?
No, I think I'm gonna give myself a quick little break from soccer before the European seasons kick up again here. I know there's some friendlies or whatever going on, these next few weeks, but I think need to just focus on some other sports for a little bit, maybe some baseball.
Yeah, I think I'm with you there, except for the baseball part, but taking a little bit of a break. Since there's not much going on. Although, like we had talked about this right before the show started, and about trying to watch some of the qualifications for the different European tournaments, and how frustrating it is that we can't watch some of those.
Yeah,
And I you know, I'm sure there's going to be a time and a way soon, but I love the fact, like, I love these games early on, I think a lot more than the championship. I can appreciate when we have the championship games, you know, with the PSG and these and the quality and the skill of the players. It's amazing. But I love some of the passion and of these smaller teams and the fans and the community and seeing the stadia, seeing the the communities and just how everybody gets behind these teams, see if they can make it into these bigger tournaments. I think I have way more fun in these early stages and through the fall. And then my interest kind of goes back and forth. Like who are the smaller teams that have made it? Maybe I'll just
right.
kind of follow them. A Bodo Glint, right? Going a
One
little
of
further.
one of my very favorite things, especially in these early rounds of the European competitions, is when you click on a fixture and click on a club because you don't know anything about them, and FOTMob says no info available, and you have to
Yeah.
resort to Google. Then you know you found a good one. Like just today, I was looking through it because I was paying attention to another place I've been that I enjoyed. Olympia Ljubljana was in the first round of the knockouts. They got knocked out by a Kazakh team, unfortunately. But I came across Hamrun Spartans, which I had never heard of before. Maltese champions. Go figure.
Maltese.
FOTMob
Malta.
had nothing on them. So it's always fun when you come across one of those and you're like, oh boy, here we go down a rabbit hole.
Yeah, just a quick plug for anybody who's not familiar, the Sweeper podcast.
Yes.
If you like this kind of stuff that we're talking about, check them out. They do a lot of coverage of these smaller communities, smaller countries, smaller teams around Europe. So it's a fun podcast to listen to.
Definitely. I think they're every other week.
Yeah,
They were doing
I
weekly
can't remember.
for a bit, but I think it got to be too much for them, so I think they've gone back to every other week.
Okay, and a final thing I just thought of before we wrap up. You had mentioned me for the podcast something about the Canadian Championships you wanted to mention.
Oh yeah, just that the Canadian Championship, which has been running since I think like 2014, has never had a non-MLS winner, and we've got in our semifinals 3 non-MLS teams. So there will be guaranteed a non-MLS team in the final. But it would be nice if one of them could finally pull it out.
Yeah, I really feel very loosely followed the Canadian Premier League and some of the lower leagues, but Canada's really working on building a tiered pyramid structure.
I bet you they're going to have a nationwide promotion relegation structure before the United States does, and it won't be as close as people like to think. Yeah,
I think it's going to start showing in the Canada already has done quite well in the last
and it's
tremendous improvement over the last decade.
This is a great time for them to be building out the infrastructure too, because it's obviously not as simple as one person, but the generation of kids who are going to have been inspired by Alphonso Davies are just now getting to the age where they're going to be wanting to join professional academies. So it's there's going to be a golden generation of Canadian talent if they want to capitalize on it. So good for them.
Yeah, excellent. All right, Dylan, thank you very much for your contributions this week. And everybody else, hope you enjoyed the episode, and hope you'll join us live on Tuesdays on YouTube here at 6 o'clock Pacific time. Otherwise, catch us on your favorite podcast feed. All right, that's all I got. Dylan, any last comments before we head out?
Nope. Just go non-MLS teams.
Go non-MLS teams. All right, Dylan. We'll see you next week. Bye, everyone.